On the eve of the century's grandest union between the Hale and Hall families, I kicked aside my once deeply beloved ex-husband, Nathaniel Hale, and set my sights solely on marrying his older brother Caleb Morgan, the man rumored to be infertile. My parents believed I had suffered a tremendous emotional blow and even suspected I had lost my mind. After all, everyone in the elite circles of the capital knew that Nathaniel Hale and I had been together from high school to college, and eventually vowed to spend our lives together at our wedding. 10 years of love had solidified into an unshakable promise. Everyone thought I would never marry anyone but Nathaniel Hale. But I was unusually resolute. I was determined to leave that past behind. In my previous life, Nathaniel and I suffered 3 years of a childless marriage. After countless rounds of medication and IVF, I finally became pregnant with our son. I devoted everything to that child. But once he grew up, married, and started a family of his own, I overheard a cruel conversation on my 60th birthday. Nathaniel, when are you going to tell her that her egg was actually mine? That son has long since acknowledged me as his real mother. Let's finally be together openly. Nathaniel Hale replied coldly, just wait a little longer. Once she's dead, there'll be no division of the inheritance. When she dies, I'll marry you without hesitation. Those words shattered all my illusions like a hammer to glass. It had all been premeditated. Nathaniel Hale had always loved someone else. Now reborn into this life, I chose to fulfill their love story myself. After confirming the alliance with the Hale family, the Hale matriarch personally invited me to attend their family gathering as their future granddaughter-in-law. The moment I stepped into the Hale residence, Nathaniel's mother, Sophia Young, approached me immediately. Her displeased gaze seemed like it could devour me whole. You and Nathaniel only got engaged a week ago, and you're already showing up to family gatherings? Isn't that a bit too eager? She said sharply. Her eyes involuntarily drifted to the gifts I brought, clearly noting that the one I had prepared for the matriarch was more expensive than the one for her. Her dissatisfaction deepened, and her tone grew more caustic. Gifts based on status, huh? You're about to marry into our family, shouldn't you start learning how to please your future mother-in-law? I didn't respond. I walked directly toward the Hale matriarch. Seeing his mother's ridicule, Nathaniel stepped in to block my path. Chloe, apologize to my mom and pick a better gift for her next time, he ordered sternly. You're marrying me. You'll have to learn to get along with her sooner or later. His tone was commanding, as if convinced I would meekly comply, apologize, grovel, and try harder to win over Sophia Young. In my past life, I might have done exactly that. But not this time. I refused to tolerate her vile attitude any longer. Why should I get along with your mom? I looked Nathaniel straight in the eyes, refusing to back down. It's not like I want to marry you. Nathaniel paused, stunned, and then laughed. He didn't seem angry. Instead, he leaned in with a smug grin, speaking low so only I could hear. Chloe, if you're not marrying me, are you seriously thinking about marrying my impotent brother? He smirked meaningfully, trapping me against the wall and whispering in my ear. Let me make this clear, the entire Hale family will be mine. Marrying me is your best option. All you need to do is take care of my parents and bear children for the family. Got it? As I listened to his confident words, suspicion rose within me. In my past life, Nathaniel had always been the perfect gentleman, refined, patient, never revealing such arrogance or ruthlessness. How had he become so sure of himself, so different from the man I once knew? Could it be he had also been reborn? Had he planned all of this long ago? I flung his hand away, barely containing my anger, and turned to walk away. But before I could get far, I accidentally bumped into Grace Miller, a scholarship student sponsored by the Hale family. Now Grace let out a sharp scream as she lost her balance and fell to the ground. Her wine glass shattered, red wine spilling everywhere, glass shards flying. It was a complete mess. With tear-filled eyes, Grace looked up at me with a wounded expression. Chloe, I only wanted to toast you. And Nathaniel, why did you push me? Nathaniel rushed over, immediately draping his jacket over Grace's shoulders, then shot a cold look at me. I instinctively wanted to explain, but before I could say a word, Nathaniel had already delivered a chilling rebuke. Chloe Hall, you're already my wife. Stop making things hard for Grace Miller. Before I could react, Nathaniel had carried Grace off to the guest room to change, under the watchful eyes of the crowd. I stood frozen, humiliation flooding through me as whispered gossip spread around the room like wildfire. Just as I was about to turn and leave, Sophia Young refused to let me go. She shoved me toward the guest room, insisting I apologize to Grace Miller. Go on. Grace Miller is our savior, after all. How could you treat her like this without getting her an explanation? Sophia Young barked sharply, her face full of impatience and accusation. Watching her act so aggressively and unreasonably, my irritation only deepened. Still, I had no choice but to walk toward the guest room. Before I could even raise my hand to knock, I heard voices inside, muffled, intimate conversation, the sound of lips at wind. My heart instantly turned cold. I stood there silently, patiently waiting, though a chill was rapidly spreading in my chest. It felt like an eternity passed before the door finally opened. Nathaniel Hale was momentarily stunned to see me standing there. Then he forced a sheepish smile and tried to explain, Chloe, it's not what you think. But seeing my clenched fists and the whiteness in my knuckles, he instead chuckled lightly and said, What, are you jealous? I stared at him coldly, inwardly scoffing. Relax, Nathaniel. No matter who you fool around with outside, in the end, it's still me you'll be signing the marriage certificate with. Grace Miller suddenly grabbed my arm, her long nails digging painfully into my skin like a silent warning. Chloe, something like getting married isn't a joke, she said softly, tears already slipping down her cheeks as she put on an aggrieved expression. In the end, you and Nathaniel are the ones who truly belong together. I really am here to wish you both well. I shook her off and let out a cold laugh. Grace stumbled back unsteadily. Nathaniel rushed forward to steady her, immediately wrapping an arm around her protectively. Under my gaze, his eyes blazed with anger. Chloe Hall, I told you to stop causing trouble, he said icily. I won't hold it against you for pushing Grace, but don't go harassing her again. Focus on preparing for the wedding, that's what you should be doing now. With that, he walked away with Grace in his arms. The scent of her perfume lingered as they passed, instantly triggering my memory. Just last week, Nathaniel had given me that exact perfume. So, he had given it to Grace as well. A wave of nausea hit me. I no longer wanted to stay at this gathering. I went to the Hale matriarch to bid farewell and prepared to leave early. Nathaniel caught up to me outside. I thought he might at least offer to walk me out. But instead, he handed me a wedding planning checklist. You'll still need to handle our wedding, he said casually. After all, my mother's not used to grand events. You're a lady of refinement, graceful and meticulous, I trust you to take care of it. Then he lightly tapped my forehead, pretending to be caring as he straightened my coat. You really need to work on that temper. We've been together for 10 years, it hasn't been easy getting here. If your impulsiveness ruins this alliance between our families, you'll be the one to blame. I wiped his touch from my forehead in disgust, a wave of revulsion rising in me. Nathaniel Hale was clearly using my identity as the Hale family's daughter to secure greater power for himself. He kept saying this was a union between our families, but in reality, he was the one who needed me more. And now he had twisted it as if I were the one clinging to him. I began, but he cut me off. I won't walk you out today, he said nonchalantly. You made Grace look terrible tonight. I'll apologize to her on your behalf. I stood there in disbelief. Why should I apologize to Grace Miller? What had I done wrong? The next morning, I received an audio recording. In it were the unmistakable sounds of Nathaniel Hale and Grace Miller moaning, breathless. Grace's voice rang out, laced with threat. Even if Nathaniel marries you on paper, I'm the only one allowed to bear his children. And when that happens, your wealth, it will belong to my child. My vision blurred with rage. I finally understood Nathaniel Hale and Grace Miller hadn't just been reborn like me, they were plotting, just as they had in the previous life, to use a child to take over my wealth. All these years, I had thought I was the victim. But in this moment, I realized I had merely been a pawn in their carefully laid trap. Nathaniel Hale, Grace Miller, you are truly despicable. Thinking back to my past life, after I married into the Hale family, I endured endless suffering in the hopes of having a child. Sophia Young constantly pressured me, warning that if I couldn't give Nathaniel a child, she would send me back to my family in disgrace. Caleb Morgan, the Hale family's eldest son, once stood up for me, trying to protect me from her harassment. But Sophia cried before the Hale chairman, claiming she only cared about the family's bloodline. After all, the eldest was rumored to be impotent, and if Nathaniel's wife couldn't bear children, the Hale legacy would die with us. For the sake of my future, I swallowed my pride and underwent IVF treatments. I finally gave birth to a child. After that, Nathaniel seemed to cherish both me and the baby as if we were his most treasured possessions. But now that the truth was out, I saw everything clearly. All that tenderness and affection had merely been part of Nathaniel Hale's carefully crafted performance. I wasn't infertile, I simply couldn't bear his child. He had secretly replaced my egg with Grace Miller's during the IVF process, also that one day through that child, he could seize my fortune. My thoughts were interrupted by a message on my phone. It was from Caleb Morgan. I'm returning to the country in 5 days. Is there anything you'd like me to bring you? I replied softly, no need, then added, see you at the civil registry. In my previous life, Caleb Morgan had stood up for me when I faced hardship, but because of the Hale chairman's anger, he was sent away to manage an overseas branch, where he remained for decades. I had always felt I owed him. In this life, I chose to marry him not out of love, but in the hope of helping him gain power in the family and change the fate of being exiled abroad. What I didn't expect was how proactive Caleb Morgan became after learning I was willing to marry him. Though far away, he still managed to send me thoughtful gifts, always knowing exactly what I liked. To return his kindness, I discreetly asked his subordinates about his preferences, and spent days preparing 29 gifts, each one symbolizing a year of his life, from birth to his 29th birthday. As I counted down the days, I silently hoped he would feel the sincerity behind these gifts the moment he returned. The day before his return, I decided to place all the gifts in his room, so he would see them the moment he walked in. But just as I stepped through the Hale family gates, I ran into Nathaniel Hale and Grace Miller. Chloe, are all those gifts for Aunt Sophia as an apology? Grace asked in a deliberately provocative tone, her eyes scanning the packages in my arms. It took me a moment to realize she was referring to Sophia Young scolding me at the last family gathering. No, I replied coldly and started walking toward the stairs. Noticing the direction I was headed, Nathaniel Hale smirked. So, they're not for my mother, are they for me? He asked, taking a few of the gifts from my hands and preparing to carry them toward his room. They're not for you, and they're not for your mother either. Give them back. I raised my voice, stopping him in his tracks. I looked at the gift in his hands, emotional as now. Nathaniel paused, clearly surprised by my reaction, then watched as I placed the gifts into Caleb Morgan's room. A flicker of shock crossed his eyes, but he quickly returned to his usual indifferent expression. So they're for my brother, huh? He said with a sneer. Trying to win over my grandmother wasn't enough, now you're trying to butter up my brother too? What a shame you've picked the wrong target. Haven't you heard the rumors about his impotence? Ever since those started circulating, his influence in the company has been greatly diminished. Even if everyone calls him a business genius, the chairman would never hand the company to a man who can't produce an heir, Nathaniel continued, his words freezing me in place. I hadn't expected Grace Miller's rumors to put Caleb in such a difficult position. Nathaniel began picking out the most expensive gifts, intending to keep them. These would be more useful if you gave them to my mother. At least she could help you gain more standing in the Hale family, he said coldly, eyeing the ruby in my hand. That ruby was a rare antique I had painstakingly searched for, perfect in every detail. Grace Miller leaned in, eyes gleaming with greed. Nathaniel, how about having that ruby turned into a brooch for me? It would go perfectly with my onboarding outfit. No, I responded icily. It's just a ruby, Chloe Hall. Let it go. Consider it compensation for pushing Grace last time. Grace, it's yours, Nathaniel said nonchalantly, handing the ruby to her. I snatched it back instantly. The force caused Grace to stumble sideways, her expression flashing with malice before she gave me a hard shove in return. Ah, both Grace and I screamed at the same time. She fell near the stair railing, while I tumbled down the steps from the second floor. Grace, are you okay? Did you get hurt? Nathaniel asked anxiously, rushing over to scoop her into his arms and carry her off to a bedroom, completely ignoring me, who was slumped at the bottom of the stairs. I gritted my teeth through the pain, clinging to the railing to slowly pull myself up, only to see Nathaniel throw me a vicious glare. Chloe Hall, do you have to hurt Grace before you're satisfied? He snapped, his rage sending an even deeper chill through me. Grace, nestled in his arms, shot me a triumphant smirk. My fury burned deep, but I could do nothing as I watched them disappear into the bedroom together. I placed the ruby on Caleb Morgan's desk before finally leaving his room. But just as I stepped into the hallway, I heard the unmistakable sounds of passion from the next room, moans and heavy breathing that tortured me like knives. Nathaniel, you're getting married tomorrow. Should we really be doing this? Grace's breathy voice dripped with provocation. There's nothing wrong with it, Grace. Don't worry, Nathaniel replied with chilling determination. Even though I'm signing that marriage certificate with Chloe Hall, the only woman I'll let bear my child is you. In that moment, I understood his plan. Nathaniel Hale intended to use an illegitimate child to secure inheritance rights for Grace Miller's child. It was nothing more than a carefully prepared backup strategy. Anger and sorrow twisted together inside me, making it almost impossible to breathe. My chest heaved and I could barely stay on my feet. At that moment, the hatred I felt was bone deep, spreading through every inch of my aching body. Nathaniel Hale, so all your schemes were already in place. But in this life, I will not let you have your way. Because the man I'm marrying is not you. The next day, I arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau early. To my shock, Nathaniel Hale and Grace Miller appeared, hand in hand. The marks from their night of passion were still faintly visible if you looked closely. Sorry, Nathaniel Hale said with a smirk, his eyes filled with arrogance and mockery. I stayed up a little late last night. Made you wait, didn't I? I replied coldly, it's fine. I wasn't waiting for you anyway. Nathaniel Hale's expression darkened in irritation. There you go again. We're about to register our marriage, and you're still playing hard to get. Chloe Hall, if you're not marrying me, who else could you possibly marry? He sounded certain, as if I had no other option. I lifted my head and smiled sweetly at the person walking up behind him. Chloe, a warm and gentle voice rang out. Nathaniel Hale's pupils widened. His body froze, and he turned around in disbelief. It was Caleb Morgan. In my past life, after Caleb Morgan was sent abroad, I never saw him again. My memories of him had grown faint. I only remembered how different he was from Nathaniel, his sharp, well-defined features, his profile as perfect as a sculpture. He always spoke with a slight frown, his voice low and magnetic, exuding the charm of a mature man. Now that I thought about it, Nathaniel Hale's demeanor in the past seemed like a crude imitation of Caleb's, which made me feel a bit sick in retrospect. As Caleb Morgan walked toward me in a crisp white shirt, exuding calm maturity and quiet determination, I stepped forward, gently taking his arm. Of course I'm here to register our marriage, I said with a smile. Caleb stiffened for a second, surprise flashing across his face, a bit like a startled boy. Impossible, he muttered under his breath. You with him, but he's... Nathaniel shouted, his expression twisted with disbelief. But halfway through, his voice began to falter. Caleb Morgan narrowed his eyes. He's what? His calm question sent a shiver down my spine. There was something in his tone and edge that felt like a threat. As if in that moment, all the secrets had begun to unravel. Grace Miller tugged at Nathaniel and dragged him toward the car. But Nathaniel wasn't ready to give up. He stepped beside me and whispered coldly. Chloe Hall, I'm warning you, enough with the drama. If you come with me now, you can still secure your place as the future wife of the next Hale chairman. Otherwise, I shoved his hand away, gripped Caleb Morgan's tighter, and walked firmly into the registry office. I glanced back. Nathaniel Hale was still standing there, furious. His roar behind me only solidified my determination. This time, I will never again be the woman anyone can manipulate. Suddenly marrying a stranger like me. If you regret it, now's the time to back out, Caleb said seriously, his eyes steady and voice deep. That should be my line, I said, my smile unwavering. I won't regret it, just worried you might. I won't either, I said firmly, tightening my grip on his hand, not a trace of hesitation in my eyes. Both of us had suffered in our past lives, one exiled overseas to live out his days in loneliness, the other deceived by surrogacy and lies. Now we had found each other, fellow survivors of betrayal. If we didn't stand together, we'd only be giving those monsters more chances to hurt us. So I held his hand and walked out of the registry office, our marriage certificate in hand. But to our surprise, Nathaniel Hale was still waiting outside. I knew they were faking it. The line so long, no way they finished that fast, he scoffed. I sneered in return. Clearly he didn't know the Civil Affairs Bureau had a VIP room. Thankfully, Caleb had pulled some strings in advance, otherwise we would have been stuck waiting. Caleb opened the car door for me like a gentleman. Grandmother wants us to head home right after registering. She has something to discuss. I'll come with you to visit your parents this evening, all right? I nodded. Nathaniel Hale trailed behind our car, eventually making his way back to the Hale residence as well. As soon as we stepped inside, the atmosphere felt tense. I gripped Caleb's hand, a little nervous. He squeezed back reassuringly and whispered, "Don't worry. I'll protect you." That look in his eyes, steady and resolute, was just like in the past. Caleb Morgan had always made me feel safe. Nathaniel's grandmother looked at me, her stern expression softening into a faint smile. "Come, Chloe. Sit beside me." Caleb and I sat next to her. Nathaniel and Grace soon followed. As soon as Sophia Young saw Grace, she greeted her with uncharacteristic warmth. But Nathaniel's grandmother's expression turned cold. She gave Grace a sharp look and said harshly, "Today's dinner is for family only. We're discussing private matters. Grace Miller, this isn't the place for you, please leave." Nathaniel, sensing the tension, refused to back down. "Grandmother, Grace has always been invited to our family gatherings. If you kick her out now, won't that hurt her feelings?" Sophia Young immediately chimed in, "That's right, Grace has no parents and already sees our Hale family as her own. Mom, where do you expect her to go?" Grandmother Hale let out a cold snort, entirely unmoved. Grace Miller seized the opportunity and sat down beside Nathaniel Hale. Once he was seated, he respectfully raised a glass to Caleb Morgan, though his words were full of confrontation. "Big brother, you still had a year left on your term at the overseas branch. Why are you back now?" He narrowed his eyes, his tone turning sharp. "And now you're meddling in my wedding with Chloe? That's completely inappropriate." Before he could finish, Sophia Young followed up with a pressing question. "What do you mean, Nathaniel? Didn't you and Chloe Hull go register your marriage today?" "No, of course not." Big brother had to butt in. "Chloe Hall left me standing outside the registry office and insisted on registering with him instead." Nathaniel Hale's anger was still boiling. "Whether they really registered or not, go ask Big brother and Chloe yourself," he snapped, glaring directly at Caleb Morgan, who remained calm and silent. Sophia Young's face darkened, her voice shrill with discontent. "Caleb Morgan's father, how could this happen? The engagement with the Hall family was clearly set with my son. How could Caleb Morgan swoop in and steal it?" Julian Rhodes responded calmly, his voice resolute and commanding. "Your son, my son, they're all Hale family. But this is a union between the Morgan and Hall families. Naturally, the eldest son takes precedence." His words rang with authority, instantly turning Sophia Young and Nathaniel Hale's expressions to stone. "But Chloe and I were together for 10 years. And now she turns around and marries my brother. What do you expect outsiders to think of me?" Of the Hale family? Nathaniel Hale was growing increasingly furious. Chloe Hall, have you forgotten what you used to tell me? That you'd only ever marry me? That you only love me? Were those just empty promises? Hearing such words in front of my current husband made me feel deeply humiliated. I opened my mouth to speak, but Caleb Morgan gently held my hand and spoke instead, his voice low but firm. Whatever Chloe did in the past, now she's my wife. Nathaniel, don't ever let me hear you say something like that again. There was a quiet strength in Caleb's voice that silenced the room. As I looked at his resolute profile, I couldn't help but feel puzzled. This man was nothing like the Caleb Morgan who had willingly gone abroad years ago. I remembered he rarely fought for anything within the family. The only time he stood up was when Sophia Young made snide remarks at me. He'd openly scolded her, causing her to run off crying to Julian Rhodes the very next day. Thinking back, Nathaniel Hale hadn't been sent away immediately after that incident. Instead, he started coming home more frequently. I often saw him in the octagonal pavilion, working on his laptop, while I read in the garden. We never spoke, but would quietly remain in each other's presence all afternoon. During those times, Sophia Young was notably restrained when Caleb was home, never daring to throw tantrums at me. It wasn't until Caleb was officially sent overseas that I got pregnant, and by then, she no longer dared touch me. A bold thought began to take shape in my mind, and I felt my cheeks flush. Grandmother Hale looked at me kindly and said, I think Caleb and Chloe are a perfect match. One is heir to the Morgan Group, the other to the Hall Group. They're a match in both status and strength. Each of her words was deliberate and meaningful. Heir to the Morgan Group. Nathaniel Hale repeated softly, a trace of confusion in his eyes. Dad is handing the Morgan Group to my brother? But he. Grandmother Hale heard his murmured protest and her tone turned sharp, slicing through the room. What about your brother? Speak. Her voice was so fierce that it silenced the entire room. My heart skipped a beat. The rumors about Caleb Morgan's so-called infertility had been widespread across Chang. There was no way Grandmother Hale hadn't heard them. Her severity now seemed to be the strongest rebuttal to those vile lies. You had plenty to say online when you were spreading those rumors, didn't you? Grandmother Hale sneered, pulling a brown envelope from her handbag and slamming it onto the table. Nathaniel Hale's face went ghostly pale. He didn't move. He didn't dare. My hands trembled as I picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside were the IP addresses linked to the accounts that had circulated the rumors. My eyes widened in shock. So it was Nathaniel Hale all along. To satisfy his own selfish desires, he had ruined my life and destroyed Caleb Morgan's along with it. Tears welled in my eyes. I turned to look at Caleb Morgan only to find him smiling gently at me. I furrowed my brows, puzzled, and he gestured for me to check my phone. I found the evidence. I couldn't let you bear the pressure of marrying someone everyone wrongly thought was infertile. Reading that message, I couldn't help but laugh softly through my tears. So Caleb Morgan had always been the dark horse, quietly preparing his counterstrike. By now, Nathaniel Hale's face was ashen. He suddenly dropped to his knees. It's not true, Grandma, this is all a setup. Sophia Young rushed forward to shield her son, her voice rising hysterically. Yes, Mom, how could Nathaniel possibly do something like this? Someone must be framing him. Grandmother Hale chuckled coldly and pulled out another folder. This time it was filled with transaction records, payments Nathaniel had made to hired internet trolls. That was the final nail in the coffin. Nathaniel Hale had no way out anymore. Sophia Young, the only reason I let you marry into the Hale family was because Nathaniel is my grandson, Grandmother Hale said coldly. But now that your ambitions have turned toward my Caleb, the price will be just a scolding. Before she even finished speaking, there was a loud smack as she threw a folder onto the table. Inside were all the evidences of Nathaniel Hale and Sophia Young's collusion. Effective immediately, Nathaniel Hale is to withdraw from all affairs of the corporation, she declared with ice-cold finality. Since you have time to spread rumors, you can go work in the information department at a branch office. Herkimer landed like a hammer blow, brutal and absolute. Nathaniel Hale immediately crawled over to Julian Rhodes on his knees, his face full of desperation. Dad, please say something for me. If I get sent to a branch office, how will people see me? Where will I put my face? Julian Rhodes looked at his disgraceful son and kicked him aside. And where do I put my face when my younger son is spreading rumors about my elder one? In the Hale family, Grandmother Hale had always held real authority. In my previous life, she passed away shortly after I married into the family. I never imagined that this time, she would step in with such decisive strength, completely stripping Nathaniel Hale of any claim to power in the Morgan Group. I silently sighed after this. Nathaniel Hale's path to reclaim power would be as hard as climbing to the heavens. Sophia Young cried bitterly by the side, begging repeatedly for forgiveness from Grandmother Hale. Julian Rhodes seemed to soften slightly and reached out to help her up. After all, Nathaniel may be sent to the branch, but she's still the lady of the Hale family. Just then, Caleb Morgan stood up. He took a file from his briefcase and handed it to Julian Rhodes. Dad, you might want to take another look at these transaction records, Caleb said calmly. But as Julian flipped to the documents, his face grew darker and darker, until finally, he flung the file at Sophia Young and Nathaniel Hale. Unbelievable. Are you two trying to bring down the entire Morgan Group? He roared. Nathaniel Hale picked up one of the sheets. His face instantly turned pale as he collapsed onto the floor. It turned out Sophia Young had been using the Hale family's name to amass wealth, colluding with small-time businessmen to smuggle goods through Hale-controlled docks. That thick stack of papers documented all her transactions and evidence of her illegal dealings. Nathaniel Hale clearly had no idea. But Sophia Young's actions were enough to strip him of his inheritance for good. This was a devastating scandal for the Morgan Group. The board had long expressed discontent with Nathaniel Hale's background, and Sophia Young, coming from a humble family, lacked the influence to compete with the powerful factions in the Hale family. Caleb Morgan's birth mother had long since passed away, but his maternal uncle was the chairman of Wan Ying Group, a heavyweight in the business world. His influence within the Hale family was substantial. Sophia Young was now rumbling uncontrollably, unable to utter another word of defense. Nathaniel Hale gripped her hand, the veins bulging on the back of his hand, his eyes filled with fury. Why? Why did you do it? He shouted. Wasn't being the lady of the Hale family enough for you? Why were you so greedy? Were you that desperate for money? Caleb Morgan looked down on him coldly. Those are just copies. The originals have already been turned over to the police. Investigators will be here soon. Did you really have to go that far? Julian Rhodes looked at him, shocked and angry, but also visibly defeated. Dad, Caleb's voice was calm and resolute, you should have known this day would come the moment you married her. She secretly gave birth to Nathaniel so she could one day return and fight for a piece of the Hale family fortune. Would she have come to recognize you at all if you hadn't been the chairman of the Morgan Group after my mother passed away? Finally, I understood Julian Rhodes's guilt toward Caleb ran so deep it had shaped every decision he made, though he rarely spoke of it. Now, he no longer dared defend Sophia Young. Clutching his chest, he waved his hand, signaling that Caleb could do as he saw fit. This family dinner, it turned out, had been orchestrated to bring justice for Caleb Morgan. I hadn't had much to eat, but as we walked out of the dining room, my heart felt strangely light. Before Caleb Morgan could say anything, we heard that Nathaniel Hale had quietly packed up and moved out of the Hale estate. At that moment, I knew he had lost all support, and the road ahead for him would only grow darker. That evening, Caleb accompanied me home to visit my parents. After dinner, I pulled him aside, full of questions, but he silently slipped an old, faded handkerchief into my hand. Holding the handkerchief, I was confused, my mind in a whirl. He took my hand and led me running toward the nearby park. The park looked familiar, even after all these years. Though much had changed, the old willow trees still stood tall, unmoved by time. I frowned, digging through my childhood memories. Suddenly, I connected him to a tearful little boy from my past. It was you? I looked at him, stunned. Caleb Morgan nodded excitedly. You finally remember. In that moment, I finally understood why in my past life after marrying into the Hale family, I always felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity with Caleb Morgan. It turned out we had met as children. Caleb Morgan smiled faintly and draped his jacket over my shoulders. Back then, my mother had just passed away. I used to come to this lakeside area to clear my head, and that's when I ran into you. I chuckled. You call that clearing your head? You were bawling so loudly I could hear you from the slide 500 meters away. Caleb laughed too. Under the moonlight, the atmosphere turned warm and romantic. He couldn't help but pull me into his arms. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of comfort. Later, he told me he once had a dream where he saw me marrying Nathaniel Hale, struggling through IVF. He said he couldn't bear to watch me become another man's wife, the mother of another man's child. In the end he chose to lead, exiling himself to a foreign land, resigned to growing old alone. I was stunned. So, he had left willingly. I leaned quietly against his chest, overwhelmed with emotion. Thankfully in this life, it was him by my side. Not long after Caleb and I registered our marriage, we began planning the wedding. One afternoon, while I was trying on wedding dresses at a bridal boutique, I suddenly heard a commotion outside. The voices sounded familiar. I changed quickly and walked out only to see Nathaniel Hale and Grace Miller. It had only been 3 months, but Nathaniel already looked frighteningly thin. When he saw me in my wedding dress, a flicker of emotion crossed his eyes. Nathaniel, why do others get custom-made gowns, and I have to buy off the rack? Grace Miller complained, visibly displeased. I noticed the slight bulge of her belly and instantly understood. Nathaniel didn't say much. He simply nodded at me, then pulled Grace aside. A custom dress takes time. Can your baby wait that long? Are you planning to walk down the aisle with a big belly? Grace immediately burst into tears. I just want a grand wedding. Look at your brother and Chloe Hall, they're having their ceremony in Ireland. I want a custom gown too. Why are you being so stingy? Nathaniel's temper flared. Why are you even comparing yourself to them? He's the heir to the Morgan Group. Me? I'm just a low-level manager in a branch office now. You should be grateful I'm even buying you a dress. If you're not satisfied, rent one. Seeing me there, Grace quickly called out, sister-in-law, trying to get on my good side. I simply waved her off with a cold expression, refusing her attempts at friendliness. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there awkwardly. Later, I learned that Grace, frustrated by the wedding dress issue, had actually broken up with Nathaniel in a fit of rage. His pride shattered, Nathaniel lost control and, in a fit of madness, held her at knife point to force her to stay. When Grace refused, he stabbed her 12 times. When the news broke, Caleb's father nearly went white-haired overnight. His wife was jailed for smuggling, and now his son was in prison for murder. The only person he could rely on now was his eldest son, Caleb Morgan. After Caleb and I got married, Grandmother Hale's health visibly improved. She often smiled and said the thing that brought her the most comfort was seeing the happy little home Caleb and I had built. Now I can rest in peace when the time comes, she'd say. As I stood in the garden, watching Caleb push our daughter on the swing, a deep sense of warmth filled my heart. In that moment, I felt my greatest comfort. This time I had chosen the right person, someone who truly loved and protected me, someone who had quietly waited for me all these years. Because the patriarch of the Thomas family took money he shouldn't have, a curse befell them. None of the male heirs could father children. Only I, the sacred Buddha mother, could break it. Jack Thomas married me, begging me to bear him a child. I endured tremendous pain to give birth to his Somi. Yet that very night, his first love jumped from the 18th floor, screaming that I had cursed her, causing her to rot alive in agony. Jack flew into a rage. He sliced open my chest, carved out my heart, and forced poison down my throat. The one I love is Chloe. Even without you, she could have given me a child. You were cruel enough to kill her. Now you'll suffer just as she did. You'll die for her. With a single strike of his blade, I died, filled with hate. He even fed my flesh to the dogs. Then I woke up back to the day of our engagement. This time, I would make them all pay. I don't want to marry Olivia Clarke. I want to marry Chloe, Jack Thomas declared loudly, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo in the middle of our lavish engagement banquet. In that moment, I realized he had been reborn too. The guests below started murmuring, while his parents' faces darkened with anger as they dragged him backstage. His grandfather didn't hesitate, he slapped him across the face. You ungrateful brat, what nonsense are you spouting? Apologize to Olivia at once. Jack took the slap without flinching, without the slightest hint of remorse. Dad, I've always loved Chloe. In terms of family background, looks, and character, how does Olivia Clarke even compare? His parents said nothing. Of course. I always knew they looked down on me. They only pretended to accept me because I was the only Buddha mother capable of continuing their bloodline. Jack Thomas had faked every bit of his affection. He brought me breakfast for 99 days in a row just to win me over. Mom, Dad, Chloe is a Buddha mother too, he added. I just found out today. That's why I said what I did. Chloe Hall walked in wearing a pure white dress, more extravagant than even mine. Her voice trembled with emotion. Please, Mom, Dad. I love Jack. I can give him children too. Please bless us. The guests were already in an uproar. I heard the Thomas boy and the Hall heiress were childhood sweethearts. Olivia Clarke just barged in out of nowhere, clinging to her pregnancy to steal Jack away. Yeah, but I heard Olivia and her adopted brother Luke Adams have always been suspiciously close. Maybe Jack saw them in bed together and backed out of the wedding. The Clarke family was punching way above their weight anyway. And now this? No wonder they say pretty women are the most poisonous. I stood silently, watching the chaos unfold both on stage and off. Jack's parents glanced at me after hearing Chloe's claim. I gave them a cold, mocking smile. Then let's call off the engagement. They feigned a polite tone, trying to appear apologetic. We'll make proper amends to the Clarke family. At the banquet, they personally announced that Jack and I were no longer engaged. The news confirmed the guests' suspicions, and the looks they gave me turned even more scornful. Jack, worried things might change, shamelessly suggested. Why not turn this into my engagement party with Chloe instead? She's already dressed for it. Chloe gave a shy smile. I looked at the happy couple on stage. Just moments ago, I had been the one standing beside him. In my past life, I had been blinded by Jack's fake tenderness. He drove me to work every day, even when it wasn't on his way. He never missed a holiday gift and once traveled the entire country just to find me the perfect ragdoll cat. I had always feared childbirth. My aunt had died giving birth to her third child. But for him, I had willingly taken the risk. But Chloe had deceived him. She was never a Buddha mother. She bribed a fake priest to falsely accuse me of cursing her. Her death hid a terrible secret. After I die, I learned how deeply Luke Adams, my adopted brother, had loved me. He had skinned Jack Thomas alive, one cut at a time. He spent the rest of his life in prison for me and never once regretted it. I had given Jack everything only to die a tragic death. This time, I would make them all pay. I pulled out my phone and called Luke Adams, who was abroad. Brother, I accept your proposal. But I need you to help me with something first. Jack Thomas's wedding was scheduled 1 week later on the same day he had once married me. After our call, Luke Adams flew back on the earliest flight. I thought he was rushing just to prepare a simple wedding. But to my surprise, he had already commissioned a designer a year ago to create a one-of-a-kind gown. He oversaw every detail of the wedding himself, from the guest list to the party favors. He was more meticulous than I was. When I suggested we keep it simple, he shook his head. A wedding only happens once. I want to give you the best. Back in high school, he had already grown into a handsome, upright young man. I used to stare at him in secret, but the sibling label always held me back. Now I had finally acknowledged my feelings and was ready to marry him. One day, while shopping alone for the wedding jewelry, I ran into Chloe Hall and her entourage. She was dressed in extravagant designer clothing, looking me up and down with disdain as I stood there in a simple tank top. What is this place coming to? Even strays off the street can walk in now, she sneered. With the Clark family's money, I doubt you can even afford the cheapest little trinket. Someone call the clerk and get her out of here. She was a VIP customer at the store, so without hesitation, the clerk asked me to leave. But this was the only store that carried the perfect tring for Luke Adams. Other designs didn't measure up. I didn't want him to settle for anything less. No matter what, I had to buy it today. I stood my ground. I came here as a paying customer. Does your store discriminate to the point where certain people aren't even allowed to enter? Do I need to show a bank statement just to buy jewelry? A crowd of bystanders began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Many started criticizing the store for being too harsh. Chloe Hall, embarrassed, retreated inside. Only then did the manager appear, apologize to me, and allow me in to browse. Chloe was still deciding between two pieces when she saw me trying on a third. Her expression instantly changed. Olivia Clark, you can't afford that anyway. Take it off and give it to me. Before I could respond, she dramatically burst into tears, her voice trembling with false grievance. Olivia, I don't know what I did to offend you, but you always take the things I love. You can have the jewelry, but I won't let you take Jack from me. Jack Thomas suddenly strode over and yanked the bracelet from my wrist, so hard that it left a ring of red around it. Olivia Clark, if I ever see you bullying sweet, fragile Chloe again, don't blame me for what I'll do. I know you're only acting this way because you love me and you're jealous of her. But my wife can only be her. I let out a cold laugh. Did your brain fill with water, Jack? Still think you're some kind of heartthrob, who gave you that confidence, Liang Jingru? I was the one who saw that bracelet first. And now I'm the one stealing from her? Are you all auditioning for a soap opera? Chloe, just let her have it, Jack said impatiently. Chloe looked stunned. But Jack. Jack sneered. Even if we let her have it, she can't afford it. She's just putting on a pitiful act, pretending she can. Unless she sells herself to some old ugly man, she has no way to climb up the social ladder. She was publicly rejected by me. What rich heir in the capital would even look at her now? Looking at his face, remembering the love we once shared in my past life, I suddenly felt nauseated. He had written Clear Breeze, Bright Moon, a poem that once shook the capital, earning him fame as a literary genius. I had thought he was as noble as his words, pure and gentle. I never imagined the real Jack Thomas was nothing but filth, a man reeking of rot beneath a pretty shell. Then his mother walked in, pretending to be gracious. Olivia must want me to buy it for her, consider it repaying a favor. But don't bother clinging to Jack anymore. He has a bright future ahead of him, one you have no place in. I'd had enough. Mrs. Thomas, rest assured, even if I were to throw myself at the young security guard outside, I wouldn't stoop so low as to cling to your precious son. He's old, short, and underwhelming. I pulled out a black card and pointed at the piece I wanted. I can pay for this myself. I don't need charity from anyone. If you're all so eager to spend money for others, why not donate more to orphanages? This card was from Luke Adams. It granted me access to anything in the store. Jack Thomas didn't even qualify to apply for it. When Jack saw the card, his face twisted in rage. He dragged me out of the jewelry store. Olivia, did you get that card by selling yourself? You're disgusting. Then he slapped me hard across the face, the sting burning hot on my cheek. You're throwing a fit because I dumped you, aren't you? Still want me to marry you? I could forgive your past, but from now on, you'd only be good enough to be my secret mistress. He snatched the card, snapped it in half, and threw it far away. Then he suddenly kissed me forcefully, his hands trying to tear open my blouse. I struggled to break free, but he pinned me down like a madman. I screamed at him. You're insane. Touch me again and I'll call the police. I'll have the entire Thomas family disgraced. Let's see who's humiliated then. His gaze darkened. He stared at me, voice cold and threatening. Only if you have what it takes to stop me. Then everything went black. I had been knocked unconscious. When I came to, I was locked in a basement room of the Thomas estate. My phone was gone. I had no way to contact anyone. But my wedding to Luke Adams was the day after tomorrow. What should I do? I cried and screamed, but no one came. The basement was deep in the mansion. No sound could escape. Only one woman came by to deliver meals. I begged her for help, but she remained expressionless and walked away without a word. Eventually, Jack Thomas showed up. I knew this was my only chance. So I pretended, put on the face of the woman he thought he loved. Jack, I was wrong. I still love you. I shouldn't have acted out like that. Punish me however you want. I'm willing to be your mistress. I just can't breathe down here. I'm dying. Please don't leave me in this place. He softened, just as I hoped. He moved me to a guest room upstairs, though he still locked the door. I glanced at the second-floor window, gritted my teeth and jumped. Limping from the fall, I fled that house with everything I had. When Chloe Hall saw me appear at the wedding venue, she was completely stunned. She immediately ordered several security guards to surround me. Olivia Clark, this is a private wedding. Without an invitation, you're not welcome here. Leave now or I won't bother seating you. The dignity. There were 2 weddings at this hotel today. I was here for mine. It just so happened that I passed by theirs. I looked her in the eye and stood my ground, defiant and unshaken. With this setup, one might mistake it for a death trap, not a wedding banquet, I said with a smirk. Chloe Hall's face turned stormy with rage. You shameless wretch. Throw her out now, she snapped. Security guards moved in to drag me out. Jack Thomas's parents watched from afar, sneering, enjoying the spectacle without making the slightest effort to intervene. In my past life, I had run myself ragged across the country searching for doctors to cure Jack Thomas's mother's illness. I personally brewed her herbal medicine every day, massaged her back, did everything to gain their approval. But the more I tried, the more they disdained me. They had looked down on me from the start. Their kindness was always fake, so fake, it chilled the heart. I pulled out my access pass for the hotel. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to touch me. The guests began whispering. I heard Miss Hall is supposed to be talented and elegant, but kicking out a guest in public, how disgraceful. Even if she minds that Olivia Clark was the original bride, she's already taken her place. Why can't she let go? It's making them all look bad. The ceremony continued. Chloe Hall, her face dyed with resentment, was forced back on stage to go through the motions. Jack Thomas's mother shot me a cold glare before speaking loudly for everyone to hear. Chloe is the only daughter-in-law I recognize in the Thomas family. Jack is lucky to marry her. I hope she will soon bless our family with children. Chloe Hall looked deeply moved. Mom, I'll make sure Jack has a house full of children, she said sincerely. Jack's mother smiled in satisfaction and added in a scornful voice. Some people had the nerve to claim they were the only Buddha mother. Shameless, absolutely shameless. All eyes turned to me. I stepped forward, unflinching. The one who's lying is Chloe Hall. She can't give Jack Thomas a child. What a pity, such a powerful family, and not a single heir. Jack pulled her behind him protectively. You're insane. Spouting this kind of nonsense in front of the elite of the capital? Are you trying to drag the entire Clark family down with you? I met his threat with a calm, steady voice. As the true Buddha mother, I swear if Chloe Hall can give birth to your child, I will kneel before her and apologize in front of everyone. Just then, a voice rang out from the entrance. Then let me sweeten the deal. Luke Adams walked in, dressed in an exquisitely tailored suit. Every woman at the banquet couldn't take their eyes off him. Jack's face darkened. From the first time they met at the Clark house, he had sensed something dangerous in Luke. His instincts weren't wrong. Luke Adams had feelings for me. What are you doing here? Jack growled. But Chloe Hall's father stepped forward with a respectful smile. President Adams, what an honor. Apologies for not greeting you sooner. Then he turned to Jack. Jack, don't just stand there. This is Luke Adams, the legendary Wall Street tycoon, CEO of K.C. Group. Jack stood frozen. The truth hit him like a truck. Luke had always used his English name abroad. Only a handful of his top business partners knew who he really was. I came to raise the stakes for the woman I love, Luke said smoothly. Let's wager the land in West Suburb. If she wins, I'll gift it to you unconditionally. Jack, still overly confident, sneered. Fine. If I lose, I'll pay you full market price for that land. But to pay that amount, he would have to sell the entire Thomas estate. His grandfather looked like he was about to explode but held his tongue, unable to backtrack in front of so many guests. I walked over and took Luke Adams's hand in mine. Oh, I almost forgot to introduce myself, I said sweetly. I'm Luke Adams's wife. We're already married. Jack's eyes turned blood red. He stared at our joined hands with fury, grinding out the words. I won't lose. 3 months later, Jack Thomas showed up, smugly waving an ultrasound report from Chloe Hall. Looks like you two lost. Impossible. I'm the only Buddha mother in the world. Only I can give him a child. Unless. As I stood there, piecing things together, Luke Adams stepped in front of me protectively. Chloe Hall beamed smugly. Well, now that I'm pregnant with Jack's child, it's time for you to keep your word. She brought a few men with her to force me to kneel. They were clearly trained professionals I couldn't break free. But Luke Adams jumped in, single in action, taking them down with ease. Chloe and her parents were stunned. You're going to back out of a bed in front of all these people? Chloe stammered. What a disgrace. Luke looked like he was ready to fight again, but I gave him a calm look, signaling him to stop. Kneeling now wouldn't be any fun, I said with a sly smile. How about this? I'll kneel for you on live television in 2 days. Deal? Chloe, head held high, left with a triumphant smirk. Before leaving, they took the title deed for the West Suburb land as collateral. But something about that pregnancy felt off. I asked a friend at the hospital to dig deeper. When I looked at the DNA report in my hand, I knew. In 2 days, I would bring them all crashing down. Jack Thomas not only arranged for the biggest television station in B City to broadcast the event, he also invited influencers and dozens of reporters. He wanted to make sure no one in B City missed the news. But I stood on stage, unfazed. First of all, congratulations to Jack Thomas, I said calmly. You finally got the child you've been dreaming of. However, I took the liberty of finding your baby another father. Jack, are you willing to share that child with someone else? Jack lunged toward me in a fury, ready to strike, but Luke Adams stepped forward and stopped him cold. Chloe Hall's face was filled with panic. She tried desperately to stop it, but it was useless. A man with bruises all over his face stepped forward and apologized to her. They offered me too much money, he said helplessly. Jack Thomas seemed to realize something and immediately turned to glare at Chloe Hall. So this is the child's real father. Here, these are official DNA test results. 2 reports, one proving he is Josh Martin's biological son, and the other confirming the child has no biological connection to you. The reporters erupted. This kind of scandal in a wealthy family was exactly what the media thrived on. They crowded forward with microphones, firing off questions. The entire farce was broadcast live on screens across the city. Their pale, humiliated faces were captured by every camera. Chloe Hall broke down, throwing herself at Jack Thomas's feet, begging for forgiveness. She had never been some saintly holy mother. To marry into the Thomas family, she had gone so far as to have a child with another man, utterly absurd. And now, I said coldly, it's time for the Thomas family to honor their promise. Now, Jack Thomas was truly terrified. In front of everyone, he dropped to his knees and respectfully returned the mortgage certificate he had taken just days ago. I looked at him mockingly. That's it? Jack Thomas's parents rushed in, pleading with Luke Adams. Please, let us go. Our son is still young and immature. That kind of bet shouldn't count. I laughed out loud. Oh? So now he's a 28-year-old man-child. Don't worry, I've got all the video evidence on my phone. Even if you want to back out, there's no way you can. Jack Thomas's father looked like he was about to pass out from rage. Selling off the entire Thomas family estate might barely cover the amount we're talking about my life's work over the past 50 years. Are you really going to use your wealth and power to crush us like this? The old man still knew how to play the media sympathy card. But I responded calmly. I never push people to a dead end. Here's the deal: transfer every bit of cash currently in your accounts to me, and I'll drop the rest. I won't ask for more. He was still trying to squirm out of it, but the Thomas family patriarch, having seen the news, showed up in person and berated them on the spot. You've completely disgraced the Thomas group. Hand over the money now. Furious, Jack Thomas's grandfather slapped him hard across the face, knocking him to the ground. Useless disgrace of a grandson. Only then, grudgingly, did the Thomas patriarch transfer the money to me. But I wasn't finished. Oh, and one more thing besides the DNA report, I have another little gift for you. Jack Thomas gave his father a quick-acting heart kill before clearing out the reporters. The scandal had already brought enough humiliation; they couldn't afford any more. I sneered. Even if they managed to scatter the media, the news was spreading like wildfire. Everyone would know the truth. I continued. According to this medical report, Jack Thomas has a zoospirachmy. He's infertile. He will never be able to father a child. And as the only direct male heir of the Thomas family, his line ends with him. What a shame. Jack Thomas's father went pale, while his mother burst into tears, begging me for mercy. Olivia, it was all Chloe Hall's fault. She tricked everyone into believing she could get pregnant by Jack. She also slandered you. We were all fooled. Please, we beg you, give Jack a child. The Thomas family can tend like this. I almost laughed out loud. Where was all that smugness she displayed at the wedding banquet? And now she wanted to play the victim. Even Jack Thomas came groveling. Olivia, don't you remember all the sweet times we had together? I only made the kind of mistake all men make. You still love me, right? You'll give me a child, won't you? I looked at the hand he was about to place on me and felt nothing but disgust. Luke Adams stepped in and blocked him immediately. Olivia is my woman, now and forever. He pulled me away without even glancing back. No matter how the Thomas family screamed and begged behind us, Luke's bodyguards ensured my safe return. They later sought out all kinds of so-called spiritual masters who claimed they could cure Jack Thomas. One after another, self-proclaimed miracle women showed up, but none of them managed to get pregnant by him. With his patience gone, Jack Thomas's face twisted with malice. He turned to his father and growled, "Old man, those shady men you've been secretly funding all these years, I'm going to need them." Then I received an anonymous text. Come to the abandoned factory immediately, or your parents will be in danger. And don't you dare call the cops. If you do, they die. I hadn't expected they'd stoop so low. With Luke Adams away on a business trip, I was completely alone. The message had to be from Jack Thomas. Maybe it was a bluff, but when I tried calling my parents, there was no answer. Panic set in. I contacted their neighbors. Turns out no one had seen my parents for several days. That confirmed it. They were really in his hands. I called Jack Thomas directly. I need proof my parents are safe. Otherwise, I'm not coming. He pointed the camera at them. They were tied up but uninjured. My heart calmed slightly. If you hadn't shown up on time, they wouldn't still be in one piece. My heart clenched. I immediately texted Luke Adams and rushed over. What do you want from me? I demanded. I want you to give me a child. The Thomas bloodline must continue. If we leave no heir, everything the Thomas family owns will crumble in my hands. The rest of the Thomas clan will never accept us. He looked unstable, completely unhinged. I had to keep him calm or he might lose control. Fine, I said. I'll do it. I promise I'll give you a child. You think I'm stupid? A promise means nothing. I want you to do it now. Tears streamed down my face as I pleaded, please just let my parents go first. Then I'll do whatever you want. He motioned to his men to release them, and everyone moved away. Just as he was about to touch me, I yanked the hairpin from my hair and pressed it against his neck. A thin line of blood trickled down. "You disgusting freak," I growled. "One more move and I'll kill you right here." To my shock, he stepped closer. Blood flowed faster. "Go ahead," he dared me. "Do it." He was gambling on my hesitation and he won. I was a holy mother. I couldn't bring myself to kill. Smirking, he snatched the hairpin from my trembling hands. Just as he was about to overpower me, a powerful force yanked me away. "Sorry I'm late." It was Luke Adams. He had made it back just in time. He called the police, and soon the place was surrounded. Jack Thomas's parents arrived, only to be greeted by the sight of their son being arrested. They couldn't hold it in any longer. They dropped to their knees before me. "Olivia, we were wrong, so wrong. But for a time, we did treat you like our own daughter. The Thomas family cannot end here. Please just give him one child. That's all we ask. We swear we won't bother you again." They were all now begging on their knees for their only son. I felt a flicker of pity. "I can't," I said calmly. "I'm already pregnant with Luke Adams's child. And once I conceived, I lost the ability to bear a child for a man with infertility. Ask the same for Tunchlet who read Jack's fate, you'll get the same answer." Jack Thomas's father fainted on the spot. His mother sobbed uncontrollably, her voice hoarse from crying. But I added slowly, "There is still one possible way. He must crawl on his knees up the 9-heaven pagoda and 999 stone steps without food or water, praying nonstop for 3 days. And he must wear the sacred Daogu prayer beads, one of the rarest in the world." Jack's father regained consciousness just enough to murmur, "Those prayer beads, they were at auction. Buying them means selling off almost everything we own." His wife slapped him several times. "Are you still worried about money at a time like this? What matters more, our fortune or our son? But if he does all that, he'll ruin his legs. Isn't there any other way?" I shook my head slowly. The founder of the Thomas Group got rich by robbing an entire village. He burned their homes, tore families apart, many were burned alive. The villagers cursed him, and that curse lives on. Now, the price must be paid. They accepted their fate. But even that wasn't enough to erase the pain I carried from my past life. Chloe Hall still hadn't been punished. I added wistfully, if Chloe Hall hadn't lied about being the Holy Mother, Jack Thomas wouldn't have insisted on marrying her. I would have married him and borne his child, and none of this would have happened. What a shame it all ended this way. Jack's mother's eyes darkened with venom. I knew then I had planted the seed. The Thomas and Hall families had several joint ventures. Quietly, the Thomas family withdrew their investment from those projects. Without those funds, the Hall family faced devastating breach of contract penalties. When they tried to negotiate, the Thomas family shut them out entirely. The Halls knew they were at fault. Their daughter had passed off another man's child as Jack's. They beat that man bloody and forced Chloe to kneel in the ancestral hall for a full day and night, but it wasn't enough. With debts piling up and creditors knocking on their door day and night, the Halls finally made their choice. They bound Chloe Hall and delivered her to the Thomas estate, telling them to deal with her however they saw fit. They still had sons and other daughters, not worth burning the entire family for one girl. Jack Thomas looked at the trembling woman on her knees before him and felt only hate. If not for her lies, he would never have lost Olivia Clark. "You like men so much?" he sneered. "Fine. I'll give you what you want." He summoned over a dozen burly men. Chloe Hall realized what he meant and screamed, begging. "Jack, I was wrong, I shouldn't have betrayed you, I know I made a mistake. Please, don't do this. We've shared so many intimate moments, don't you remember the happiness we once had? I was the woman you loved most." Jack gave a chilling laugh, then paused thoughtfully. "Yes, once, you were." Hope lit up her tear-soaked face. She clung to his leg, desperate. "Jack, you remember, don't you? Please spare me, I beg you." But there was only cruelty in Jack Thomas's eyes. But now things have changed. This is how you'll atone for your sins, I said coldly. Realizing she couldn't change my mind, Chloe Hall turned to plead with Jack Thomas's mother. But the woman who once treated her like a daughter now looked at her with nothing but hatred. There wasn't a trace of affection left, only fury. She even slapped her across the face. It's all your fault our family ended up like this. This punishment is already too lenient. It doesn't even begin to quench the hatred in my heart. Jack Thomas forced something down Chloe Hall's throat. She immediately felt a horrible itch, like thousands of ants crawling all over her body, itching, burning, and stinging all at once. She trembled and whimpered through clenched teeth. Jack, Jack. Her voice only made Jack Thomas even more enraged. Shut her up. Rip her mouth apart. With that, he helped his mother to her feet and walked away. The burly men standing nearby moved in. Chloe Hall's screams echoed through the hall. After that, she was thrown into a filthy, damp basement, mad, broken, and forgotten. Meanwhile, the Thomas family tried everything to save Jack Thomas. Their last hope lay in acquiring a sacred prayer bead at an upcoming auction. They thought even if the bead was outrageously expensive, at worst, it would merely weaken the Thomas group. It wouldn't lead to complete ruin. But they had underestimated their enemies. Someone seemed to be deliberately driving the price higher and higher, as if they were set on destroying them. 10 billion, going once. Jack Thomas's mother, desperate and disheveled, turned to beg her husband. He's our only son, our only child. Are you really going to let him live the rest of his life unable to have children? Everyone at the auction turned to stare at them, but she didn't care. She lunged toward the bidding paddle, trying to snatch it away. Jack Thomas grabbed her arm and stopped her. Mom, if it comes to that, then I just won't have kids. I brought this on myself, I'll face the consequences. His words earned him a stinging slap across the face. You ungrateful child. Do you really think this is over? She shouted. This is only the first curse. The master warned us there would be a second and a third. We kept it from you because we thought the presence of the goddess would protect us. But clearly, she hasn't. If you don't do exactly as Olivia Clark demands, at best, your body will rot in agony, at worst, the entire Thomas group will collapse, and your father and I will be dragged down with you. Jack Thomas stood frozen, stunned. He had never known this. 10 billion, going twice. Jack Thomas's father, face full of torment, raised his paddle and cried out, "We'll take it." The auctioneer leaned in and asked quietly, "Are you sure? That means putting the entire Thomas group up as collateral." Tears welled up in Jack Thomas's father's eyes as he nodded. Years of hard work and legacy, gone in an instant, but this was the price for their sins. They finally secured the prayer bead they had so desperately sought. But before they could even savor that relief, they were evicted from their luxurious home, forbidden from taking anything with them. Overnight, the Thomas group changed hands, transferred to someone else entirely. Their legacy vanished. They were left to wander the streets. Out of kindness, I arranged a small place for them to live, gave them some clothes and money enough to survive the winter without freezing or starving to death. As for Jack Thomas, he was ordered to kneel and climb 999 stone steps. But after only a few steps, his knees were already going numb from the cold. Jack Thomas's mother, heartbroken, cried out, "My son, let me kneel for you. I'll take your place." He shook his head. "What's the point? We've already lost everything. If I can't even endure this pain, what good am I? This is nothing, I'll recover in a few days. I can't give up now." Gritting his teeth, he pressed on, kneeling and bowing step after step, blood trailing behind him as his knees ground against the stone. The cold snow made the steps slippery, and he slipped several times, but he refused to stop. His strength was nearly gone, but he kept going. When he was nearly at the top, just steps away from finishing, he stopped to catch his breath. But before he could rest, a wild, shrill voice stopped him. A deranged woman stood in his path. She was barefoot, hair matted, clothes torn and barely covering her body. She stood unfazed by the freezing wind, her presence chillingly unnatural. Jack Thomas recoiled in fear. In the darkness, he couldn't make out her face, but her silhouette was familiar. She stepped closer and closer until he could see her clearly. It was Chloe Hall, the woman who was supposed to be locked away in the basement. She smiled, eyes glinting with madness. I finally found you. After the Thomas group fell, they let me out. Do you know how much I suffered? The only thing that kept me alive through the pain was the thought of taking revenge on you. I pretended to be insane just to lower your guard. She raised a knife she had hidden somewhere. You're going to die here. She lunged at him, stabbing. Jack Thomas slipped, barely dodging the blade. But after crawling up those steps, he couldn't even stand. His legs were useless. All his strength had long been spent. He was completely at her mercy. Chloe Hall knew it too. Her twisted grin widened as she raised the knife for a second strike. But fate intervened. Her foot caught on a jagged rock, and she felt her blade stabbing wide. Jack Thomas endured the searing pain of the knife wound in his back and his final strength. Channeling all his remaining energy into his arm, he seized her wrist, the hand that held the blade, and gripped her throat. She couldn't move. Slowly, Jack pulled the knife from his own body. With one final thrust, he ended her life. Blood spilled across the sneda, soaking into his clothes. Half of the blood was Chloe Hall's, and the other half was his own. He tore a piece of fabric from her clothing and hastily wrapped it around his wound. Then, he continued walking. Jack Thomas no longer knew where he was heading. His vision blurred, his eyes barely able to stay open. He just kept moving forward. In his mind, a voice began to call out to him. Slowly, it became clearer. It was Olivia Clark. Images from his past life flickered in his memory. Olivia Clark smiling, cradling their plump newborn son, snuggling beside him with love and warmth. She would gently call him out of his study to rest, bringing him fresh fruit. But he didn't feel tired. He just wanted to provide them with the best life possible. He loved them. He cherished those peaceful days. And then Chloe Hall had reappeared. Tears streaming down her face, she told him it was Olivia Clark who had wronged her, that she had destroyed the love they once shared. Chloe claimed she had suffered terribly at Olivia's hands. And he believed her. Blinded by emotion, he turned against the woman he loved most. Suddenly, Jack awoke from the memory drenched in cold sweat, lying in a hospital bed. He broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. How could he have been so foolish? How could he have believed Chloe Hall? How could he have hurt Olivia Clark so deeply? He looked at his parents and asked desperately, "Where's Olivia Clark?" In his past life, whenever he was sick, Olivia Clark was always by his side. Why wasn't she here now? His mother's words brought him crashing back to reality. Olivia Clark and her husband are currently speaking with the doctor about your condition. Jack Thomas's fury erupted. Olivia Clark doesn't have a husband, she's my wife. His father, unable to bear it any longer, slapped him across the face. Wake up, you two were never married. How could you say something so ridiculous? She's the one paying for your hospital bills right now. Only then did Jack finally understand this was reality. And he had lost her for good. Regret flooded through him. When I returned to the hospital room, Jack Thomas's mother grabbed my hand, pleading. Olivia, he couldn't complete what you asked of him. He's paralyzed now. Is there anything at all that can still be done? Jack looked down in shock and realized for the first time that his legs were completely numb. He went berserk, pounding the bed in despair. His father and my husband rushed to restrain him. I let out a sigh and shook my head. This was his last chance. Instantly, Jack's parents turned pale with hopelessness. Jack himself fell silent. A deathly stillness settled over the room. Then Jack spoke. Mom, Dottie failed you both. You found Olivia for me, but I never cherished her. This body was given to me by you, now I'm giving it back. He shattered the IV bottle and seized a shard of glass, aiming it at his throat. Luke Adams reacted quickly, stopping him just in time. Hold on. It's not entirely over yet. You already completed 999 prostrations. That's enough to protect the Thomas family from the curse. But you and it here's no way forward for us. You won't suffer any more backlash, but your illness it can't be cured. Jack's mother finally broke down in sobs and hugged him tightly. That's enough. This is enough. At least he's alive. Just as I was about to leave, he called out to me. The room was quiet, just the two of us. You were reborn too, weren't you? Yes, I replied. There's one thing I need to know. In the last life, Chloe Hall insisted you had harmed her. I saw the condition she was in, and I believed her. That's why I swore I'd never fail her again in this life. But tell me what really happened to her. I had once intended to leave Chloe Hall with a final shred of dignity, but now it was time for the truth. In the last life, after she discovered I was a a sacred mother, she thought she could become one too, just by becoming my master's disciple. But Fomu is a role one must be born into. She could never have it. She sought out a Taoist priest, who gave her all sorts of potions. She took everything, desperately trying to conceive your child. But nothing worked. The drugs destroyed her body. In the end, she died in agony, her flesh rotting from the inside out. Jack let out a bitter laugh. So this was fate, cruel and inescapable. He looked at me and said, Olivia, I'm sorry. Before I die, could you say you forgive me? Just once. It would bring me peace. But I was merciless. Jack Thomas, I will never forgive you. I'm not some saint. You did all of this. You don't deserve forgiveness. Even if you want to blame Chloe Hall, you were the one who chose to believe her. That's on you. I closed the door behind me, leaving Jack Thomas alone with his remorse. Later, Luke Adams and I had a child together, and we lived a happy life. As for Jack Thomas, he never left his house again. His mother cared for him in every possible way, but in the end he succumbed to depression and died.